Well, another 2 weeks flies by in the world of aviation, and you're back with Paul Brennan here in Wellington and
Martin Noakes, still in Melbourne.
Plenty to talk about this program. But one thing that we've mused over quite a few times, Martin, in the past, and we've done quite a few of these programs now, we've talked about, our theoretical A322, and that is really the long-range version of the A321 to sort of fill that niche that the 75s have, mainly for US carriers, under 4,000 miles sort of range capability. And I think they were listening, Martin. I think they were listening to what we were saying.
Oh, they must have been.
They were tuned in.
Yeah, they didn't call it the A322. That's because they didn't want to give us all the credit. They called it the A321LR.
It was only, I guess, logically a matter of time.
Oh, yeah. And, the Americans use a lot on Transcon. The British used to use them on a lot of their Caucasian routes to sort of Kazakhstan and places like this. Those used to be flown for this with the 757s. Low peak runs to Israel, North Africa were all 757s. So anything that needed sort of up to 3,500 miles range was 757 material.
And there's still, I think, over 800 757s in service. And quite a few of those, probably almost half of those, are in the US. Not all of them are flying internationally, of course. A lot of them are domestics. But, I'm also thinking, like you say, airlines like Iceland Air, those sort of carriers that have long-range, narrow-body services that they've flown for a long time, all candidates for this. Though I think Airbus is saying they don't expect to sell a huge number.
No, they don't, which is interesting because people, when they talk about it, they seem to think Airbus will sell a lot of them, particularly to people getting rid of 757s, of which, as you've just pointed out, there are over 800 in service. So it wouldn't surprise me if they sold more than they're letting on. It's up to 4,000 miles range, of course, in a relatively low-density seating arrangement, only 160 seats at that, which is about 10 less than the 757 could carry, but it just looks like Boeing doesn't really have a matching product. The 737-900, they're pushing it to get as many people into as they can, but that won't get the range, and it also suffers from pretty poor takeoff performance at high weights.
And it doesn't have containerized cargo, so it's back to the drawing board if they want to compete there, surely.
The conjecture is that Boeing have basically ceded that market to Airbus, and that's why they've come out with the 200-seater 737-800, which they think is a very competitive product and the one step below. Again, Airbus, if they can do that to the A321, I'm pretty sure they can pull something out the hat with the A320.
So what are they saying? Is it a radical alteration of the basic platform, wing design? Is it engines? How are they going to get that range? Where is the extra fuel going to go?
It's the engines, some software changes, and some extra fuel tankage. That's it.
What about Air New Zealand? They would be a candidate for that aircraft, wouldn't they?
You reckon, eh? Perth?
Yeah.
Perth and the islands, a lot of people, because they wouldn't need the full range to the islands, but, they could probably go with a 220-seater mid-range, medium-range aircraft. I wonder if they'd get to Perth with over 200 people on board, because then it's a 767 replacement.
And just think of how much less it costs to operate.
Weighs 97 tons.
I wonder if the big orders for American and the ongoing relationship with Delta are responsible for this, or pushed it over the line, because they are the carriers that operate the narrow bodies across the Atlantic to the European destinations. Quite a few of them keeping up that frequency point-to-point concept that the Americans, they're the ones who really like that. I'm anticipating that the majority of sales for that type will be for those airlines.
Yes, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was negotiation with those big American airlines that pushed Airbus into offering this, because the question was no doubt coming up during negotiations. Yes, but if it only had another 300 miles range, we'd take a few more. That must have been what happened.
Yeah.
Also, a very interesting situation is Iceland Air. They were getting rid of their 757s, replacing them with 737-900s, and now this has come on. A lot of people are saying Iceland Air will defer that, or won't take the Boeing. This is just too good for them. They can then do West Coast US or West Coast Northern North America.
Yeah.
One stop to Europe via Reykjavik in an A321. I mean, that's got to be pretty compelling.
Thomas Cook would be a candidate, or Condor, and also I imagine Aer Lingus. That would give them, again, that low to cost to operate transatlantic reach with a narrow body.
Yeah, Dublin to Boston.
Yeah, gone are the days of having to do that in a wide body when that's well within the range. Well within the range.
Yeah.
Do you think that's another example of Airbus's, this dynamic product improvement sort of philosophy that they've gone to. This is another very quick alteration or improvement to the type, isn't it?
Yes, it's the whole continuous improvement thing. Buttering up customers to accept what you've got, but continually making your product quite significantly better. These aren't small changes. But of course, it's all together with the whole Neo rollout. So I guess if they were going to offer that type of thing, they've now got the platform for it. And if you think that the Neo is going to be, 5 years further into service, it's going to have another 5% fuel gain or efficiency gain, and et cetera, et cetera. Maybe in 5 or 6 years, Airbus say, the demand for this plane's been really, really good. Why don't we, slightly modify the wing and add a couple of more frames to it? Then you would have the 322.
Boeing surely will have to now think about a new narrow body.
I think the problem Boeing have got is the program accounting method they use. Well, the debt they've accumulated on the 787 program, it went up last year and it wasn't scheduled to. And it's now standing at $23 billion in the red for the 787 program. I don't know whether their investors would be that keen to pump any more money into developing a narrow body, considering that'd be another $5 to $10 billion. So, interesting. If the 787 had been a runaway success, which, it hadn't cost so much money to make a success, I think they'd be doing it now.
Yes, but again, if you lock yourself out of a market which really, in terms of numbers of units, is always the biggest selling category, and every, 25, 30 years that is renewed, then that's a long-term decision to get out of that particular...
Absolutely, but every now and again you get the perfect storm. So they're $23 billion in debt on the 787. Right. They should not have been in debt at all by this stage. They're taking a $3 billion write-off on the 747-8i. They're just about to start developing the 777-8 and 9. I don't know whether many people would give them a whole lot of money.
Okay. Speaking of new models, Martin, it's been a long time anticipated, and I believe I'd say it'd be the first time the Japanese have produced an airliner since that turboprop, back in the early 60s. What was it, the YS-11?
Yeah, the Hawker Siddeley 748 look-alike.
Yeah, it had a very short range, if I remember rightly.
Yes.
But it seemed to be quite a good aircraft. It had a very good aftermarket. It went on selling around, regional Pacific Airlines, Hawaii mainly, I think, for quite a while. I remember seeing a whole lineup of them at Tucson Airport, at the graveyard there that sort of ended up there. But they've rolled out a new regional jet. I think it looks pretty cool, actually. What do you reckon?
It does. It looks very nice, yes. The Mitsubishi MRJ 90. There was a 70-seater, but now it's the 90. They haven't sold any of the 70s. Interesting thing about the plane, it was going to be a composite plane because Mitsubishi is one of the key suppliers to Boeing on its 787 program.
Of course.
So they make the wing and the wing box.
Right.
But shortly after announcing that they were going to do it and everything and saying that it was going to be composite and blah, 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 they've actually turned around and done basically the whole plane in aluminium.
What does that tell you?
It turns out you can't get the current generation of composites that light on smaller planes.
Ah, right. Okay.
Yes. I think they thought they were a generation further in, but it turns out that on high cycle, relatively short range planes, they just felt safer with aluminium, and so that's what they went ahead and did.
I'm sure Japanese carriers have bought this thing.
No.
Oh, okay.
Nobody's actually bought many of them. I think the biggest order was an American airline. I think SkyWest has taken 100. With 100 options.
Is that California based?
Yeah. The Japanese have probably taken, I don't know, less than 50.
Oh, okay. Mind you, their local carriers tend to fly big aircraft, don't they?
Yes, that's exactly.
They've got big customer base, lots of people to shift, so it's.
Which is why they stopped the 70-seater and are now only making the 90-seater. It again doesn't have great range. I think the maximum range is under 2,000 miles.
Right. Well, it's there to compete against the C Series, is it primarily?
Yeah, but the C Series is wider, higher, takes more people because it looks. The C Series. It's the over 100-seaters that have sold the most. And, of course, the C-Series is also coming out with a 300, which is a 150-seater.
Well, I wonder if they're going to get any success with this. I mean, you mentioned that initial order, but we'll see.
I think all up, they've got, 230 or so, 220 actual orders and another maybe 200 options. All the competition's getting bigger. including the turboprops at the bottom end of the market, they're coming up to 90 seats.
Yes.
Embraer with their ERJs, they're getting bigger. I think the Japanese are kind of wishing they'd done an MRJ 120.
And they may still do that. When is the first flight? How far away?
They've rolled out the completed plane. I think they're just wrapping it up to get ready for the first flight. So probably January, February time.
Yes, on our YouTube version, you can see an image of that rollout example, the prototype. It's sort of amazing that it's been so long since they've made an all-new passenger plane, considering the industrial power of that nation.
One could argue that they build the 787.
Yeah, but it's not like a Japanese product. It's not identified as their industry, really, is it?
No.
All right,
Yeah.
so watch that space. And what, first flight, did you say early 2015?
Early 2015, and in typical Japanese fashion, it was a roll-in as opposed to a roll-out. So
Okay.
they had I watched the video, they had everybody sitting in the hangar, and they brought the plane in from the outside, whereas everywhere else, everyone's gathered outside the hangar, and they roll the plane out.
Okay, some local news now, and it's sad to read that Wellington-based aviation company Vincent Aviation has gone into receivership, affecting about 30 workers. We mentioned a few programs ago, Martin, that they were in receivership for their Australian operation, which seemed to have been a bigger operation than a local one, but it's spilled over and it's really affected the local operation. Seems like the 146 was the problem.
Yeah.
Boy, if you don't find work for a plane that size, you've got big bills, haven't you?
Absolutely, yes, and especially the 146, I think.
Yeah, they say here in a quote from the Stuff website that the problem was the income generated by that 146 got caught up in the Australian receivership, but the costs in relation to the aircraft came back to the New Zealand entity. So no income, but all the costs. I guess you figure from that. So, yeah, it's been a company that's been around for a long time. And I've known Peter Vincent over the years, and he's been a really solid operator. So I'm sorry to hear about that, but that's business, right? The other big story for receivership was the helicopter company HeliPro. Again, a company with a long history, operated by Rick Lucas, a big personality in the helicopter business in this country. They had operations in other parts of the world, the red helicopters. People will recognize those. Boy, that was a bit of a surprise to hear that, don't you think?
It was indeed. I wonder if their overseas operations have been affected, though.
Yeah, I haven't seen any reporting on that. I know that the receivers were getting an all clear from Civil Aviation that the fleet was up to maintenance standard and could fly, and I think that was confirmed last week or a week or so ago, and the companies continued trading through this period. One thing that caught my eye, Martin, in the reporting of this was that there had been a drop-off in aerial photography work because of drones.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And that had not been cited as the full reason, but a component of the alteration of their cash flow that they obviously experienced. Now, that's going to be something that it's not going to go away.
I mean, if you look at the footage coming out of those drones now, it is absolutely astounding. You could argue that it's actually better than that taken from...
I think they are better.
Yeah.
And I've done quite a bit of air-to-air photography over the years. You just really can't beat the smoothness and the angles. Non-aviation related insofar as the subject matter was the protests in Hong Kong, and I saw a video of those protests shot from drones. Just amazing looking.
Yeah, I know. And there's
really tantalizing footage, and you're just talking about a street demonstration there, flying over it, flying through it, through the buildings. Incredible.
There's some very interesting YouTube videos, and I've forgotten the name of the guy, but he's an Indian guy and he lives in China, and he builds custom octocopters for news organizations in this, and they're big. They're about 1.5 meters in diameter. They've got 8 motors, big batteries. But he's actually lifting up not GoPro cameras, he's lifting up proper HD television cameras with lenses and everything.
Yeah.
And you have 2 people flying one person flies the octocopter, another one flies the gimbaling device on the camera, and then you have another camera operator operating all the the zooms and all this type of thing. And the footage that comes off this thing is just incredible.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be putting a lot of the traditional aerial photography companies, i.e. helicopter operators and rigs that fit on helicopters, under pressure business-wise globally, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely.
It's changing the industry. But sad to see that both HeliPro and Vincent Aviation are suffering. And really that tells you that in a small country, it's very difficult to make it, even after being years in the business, in the aviation business.
It is.
What did the investment guy Buffett say about becoming a millionaire? Start off as a billionaire, get into the airline business.
Yeah, yeah.
You end up
Yeah.
a millionaire pretty quick, I think was in a roundabout way what he was trying to say. Another story locally is that Rotorua is ending, that is the district council, they're ending the $1 million subsidy towards the direct Rotorua-Sydney flights. They're going to be canning those direct flights at the end of April. They said they're going to see if they can spend the money strengthening the siding Rotorua, Queenstown, and maybe other domestic services. I'm surprised this hasn't worked, and that's a big subsidy, $1 million a year, isn't it?
Yeah, obviously wasn't paying for it, was it?
No, well, they obviously thought they weren't getting the benefit from it.
That's what I mean, yeah.
In fact, the Mayor, Steve Chadwick, is saying that the $1 million could be better invested elsewhere. It's sort of sad because I remember when they heralded in those flights and it was talked of like it's a game changer for Rotorua, but obviously it hasn't been.
No, I mean, I know there was some talk that, you could fly to Rotorua and go skiing in Ruapehu and all of this, but really, that was a bit of a stretch. Basically, Aussies only want to go to Queenstown.
Right.
So, yeah, one flight ends in Rotorua and another one begins in Melbourne, because when I came through Melbourne Airport early in the week, there was a United 787-900 just flown in from LAX. It was the inaugural flight of that service. Yeah.
LAX, okay, that's quite a long one, isn't it?
It is the longest 787-9 flight.
Right.
And I was reading some comments on one of the aviation sites. It was an interesting comment because it was, now that United Airlines are flying the 787-900, Qantas is going to lose money because they're flying the A380 and that's a whale and that doesn't make them any money and blah, blah, blah. And there was a whole lot of interesting information along with that post because it turns out that at extreme range, the 787-900 can't actually carry that many people. So United are coming down here with only 252 people on board.
Oh, okay.
The matching flight by Qantas flies the A380, of course, and that carries 232 people more.
Yes.
So it's almost double the plane.
How can you win that argument?
It is actually very interesting. And if you think they all manage load factors of sort of 70 to 80%, some people are saying you'd probably make more money on an A380.
That's not great capacity, is it? And compared to what it's replacing, which would be the 747-400, I suppose.
747, yeah. So which they obviously weren't filling up. So yeah, only 252 seats. And then there was some discussion, maybe they've done that because they're all luxury seats, but they're not. There's quite a small first class section, and then there's a relatively large economy section. And I remember Air New Zealand saying that they won't be using their 787-900s across the Pacific for a similar reason, is that they can't get enough seats on it to make it pay.
I was just going to say, they haven't announced anything like that, like United are operating, and I guess,
No.
you've just answered the reason why.
Because the Air New Zealand planes have 302 seats on them, or 303, and they said at the time, yeah, we can't fly across the Pacific with those, but we can do Narita. Basically, they're going to replace the 767 flights.
Yeah, and I see they're sending up a one-off 787-9 flight Air New Zealand to, is it Shanghai in mid-November, one-off flight. I guess that's a promotional. Speaking of aircraft arriving at airports, the Singapore Airlines A380 inaugural service touched down in the last few days in Auckland, and that means that there are now 4 daily A380 services into Auckland. Who'd have thought?
Yeah. And that A380 with Singapore Airlines is quite good because if I have to fly to Europe anytime soon, I have a choice between Air New Zealand via Los Angeles in a 10 abreast 777-300 with 17.1-inch seats, or I can fly via Singapore in an A380 with 19-inch seats in economy. Yeah, guess which way I'll be flying because, yeah, it all comes
it's a tough choice.
After 20 hours in a tin tube, you want a bit of seat width.
The advertising or the coverage here included a good look at their suites and all the amenities on board, and they were given the old water salute, which is, I guess, pretty standard. So some good publicity. It amazes me that a country our size has that many of these big aircraft daily.
It is interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
Being at the end of the line sometimes can be
Of course, with Singapore, they're reducing to 1 flight a day, though, aren't they? Singapore will still have a Christchurch flight. Air New Zealand are laying on a 777 flight, and Singapore are doing the A380.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember ages ago flying on that old Convair back from the Chathams. We were coming to Christchurch, and we were following behind a Singapore Airlines A340-300 at the time.
Oh, wow, that was a few years back.
Yeah, the Celeste Star, they used to call it.
Celestar, yeah.
Celestar, yeah.
Another interesting thing about the 787, apparently airlines are getting quite a lot of pushback about 9 abreast seating in them.
Oh, why?
Yeah, because it's apparently really narrow. And all their seating configurations were 8 abreast, and at 8 abreast apparently it's real comfortable.
Yeah.
But at 9 abreast, it's to the point that I think it's United are actually thinking of going back to 8.
And was there any coverage of that new 787 in the media coming through Melbourne?
A little bit, but not much. I saw it on the ramp, and then as I walked through customs, the crew were all going through. Crew from the US are distinctive.
Yes, they. Yeah, the pilots have spray-on tans, and
Yeah.
and the women are.
Yeah, enough said.
Yeah, okay.
They're experienced, but yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm always interested, Martin, to see footage of, crash bang landings, crosswinds, turbulence, etc. I like going out and filming those myself, and I've done a few over the years. Did you see that clip at Madeira in Portugal? It's a well-known airport for gusty weather. That 737 coming in, and they take a bit of wind shear and a gust, and it's a bit all over the place, and it makes the network news in the US, and it's got 1 million views on YouTube. And I'm thinking, well, that happens about once a week, maybe more. At Welly, no big deal, but somehow it's become a hit.
It is pretty dramatic, but he or she handled it like a pro and just planted it, just normally.
Didn't panic.
No.
Yeah, just let the thing, I think it was a right wing drop, and then it's sort of a bit over to the left. But notice how once you get in that ground effect, things really settle down.
Yes. But it was pretty wild about, 50 feet up?
Oh, yeah, maybe a little more than that. But I had a look online. There's a whole bunch of videos of those sorts of landings at that airport. It's just one of those places.
Well, I think Wellington, they should move the runway another 10 degrees off the prevailing wind, and it'll be a lot more exciting.
Well, just to get that crosswind element in there.
Yeah, just so I've got something to film.
Yeah, it'd be better sport then, wouldn't it? Your arrival would be more memorable. You can sit in the back and look right down the runway.
And plus, they could save a lot of money because they wouldn't have to extend the runway because most people just stop flying here.
Yeah, the demand would fall.
Yeah.
Well, that's how you'd start promoting yourself. It's like an adventure tourism ride right from the start.
Yeah, I made it into Wellington t-shirt. Yeah.
All right, now we're on to our aircraft of the day, and because we were talking earlier about this new Japanese regional jet that's just rolled out, I thought it might be an idea to actually have a Japanese aircraft featured as our aircraft of the day. And the one that I've always liked, and I know you've always been fond of it too, is that little military freighter they made back in the 70s, the Kawasaki freighter that used the Pratt & Whitney JT8s, the ones that were on the 7.2s and the 7.3s, I think, originally.
The first one was called the C1.
Right.
And the second one, which is a highly modernized version, is imaginatively being called the C2.
So they've stuck with the airframe, though the newer one looks a bit longer. Have they extended it?
Yes, it's a bit bigger.
Right.
It's a bit bigger, and it's an amazing looking aircraft. I've seen them when I used to work in Japan. We were on the approach path to one of their military bases.
Yeah.
And these things used to do circuits, and it's just an amazing looking airplane. It looks English. You know the old Handley Page Victor?
Yes.
It kind of looks like out of the same design school as the Victor bomber.
It looks like it's about the size of one of those long Hercs.
It's 100 feet long, and the wingspan's about 100 feet. So
Right.
it's sort of C-130 category. It's just an amazing looking plane with it's really got a space age T-tail. I think it lifts about 15 to 20 tons.
Right.
So it's not huge. It's a substantial looking plane though.
It is, yeah. And they used to fly them around in that sort of polished metal look there for a while. I think they paint them now. So how many of those would they have made? Do we have a number on that? The C2's new builds, or are they redos of the old ones?
It's a completely new plane. So the C1, they only built 31 of them. Typical Japanese, at maximum payload, they only had like a 1,300 kilometer range.
Right. But they just fly around their country, really, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know whether they were a tactical airlifter. I don't know how their rough field performance was. But they certainly look like a tactical airlifter, in which case they don't need much range.
It looks like it's got way more power, too. What are they, GE engines as opposed to those old low-bypass Pratts? You know?
The first one had Mitsubishi-built JT8s, and
Right.
the new one's got CF6s.
Oh, okay, gosh. Well, it'd be twice the power, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, and the new one's about 50% bigger in all dimensions.
And glass cockpit?
So the first one weighed sort of 30 tons empty. This one weighs 60 tons empty.
Right. Okay,
Oh yeah, glass, everything.
so the design lives. It's
Oh, it
still
lives. It really lives.
relevant.
And this has got a payload of almost double the first one, so it can lift sort of 25 tons. It's actually very similar to the KC-390 or the C-390 that the Brazilians are developing.
I was going to
And
mention that.
one wonders why the Japanese aren't selling these overseas.
I was going to ask, is there any talk of any export effort? Because I imagine that aircraft would suit a lot of air forces or a lot of, I mean, applications for relief and things like that. It looks like a very capable aircraft.
Yeah, but the Japanese are not allowed to sell weapons, you see.
Is that part of the WW2 deal?
Yeah, so they could probably sell civil versions, but they're quite expensive. So
Right.
they're using them to replace their current C1s and their C-130s.
Okay, so that's our aircraft of the day, the Kawasaki C2. All right, there goes another program for another 2 weeks. Let's see what happens in the world of aviation. Will you be back in NZ for the next program, Martin, do you think?
No, I think I'll be back here,
Oh,
actually.
okay, all right. Okay, in the meantime, Paul Brennan here in Wellington, and
Martin Noakes in Melbourne.
see you later.
Cheers.